you? And Rita. Thanks very much. Take a seat, both of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this discussion about circular solutions, how we can waste less and we can win more. And I think perhaps just let's start. First of all, Guillaume, if you can introduce yourself, your company, and also how you got into the sort of circularity space.
Cool. So my name is Guilherme. I'm the founder and CEO at Flecto. And Flecto is a platform that makes businesses thrive in the circular economy. We basically built a tool for businesses to build upon kind of any type of circular model, from rental to subscription, so they can really, like retailers and the systemic change that we really believe is happening in retail, they can really serve best the customers that want access over ownership. And I actually started this journey some years ago when I first experienced the problem firsthand. So I was traveling through Southeast Asia. I wanted to access a surfboard for a very small period of time, and I couldn't rely on the community, on the retailers, or on the service providers to rent me that surfboard for a very specific amount of time. So yeah, I thought we should and could be doing better. And yeah, Flecto was born to really have an impact in terms of systemic change in retail.
And you're already doing that, I know that, because I actually chatted to you around 2 years ago, right here at South Summit, when you were CEO at Renters. So what made you make that transition, and what's the difference between Renters and Flecto?
The journey from Renters to Flecto was an interesting one, because we started, since now you understand, like, I wanted to access something, I couldn't, so we built a marketplace in the beginning. And the marketplace was basically linking owners and renters, owners that owned stuff that were not using every day and wanted to monetize on them, and on the other side, renters that wanted to use something for a very small period of time. But over the course of journey, of building Renters back then, we understood that our impact could be faster and even bigger by actually enabling companies that wanted to have this impact themselves firsthand. We saw, and we had a lot of data from companies that were joining Renters to basically build their online rental stores inside our own marketplace, but we understood that we could be doing much better. So we could be the infrastructural layer for these companies, provide them with the software for them to manage both in and outs, inventory, customers, etc., bookings, but also act upon the transaction itself. So if we could, for example, provide insurance on a per transaction basis, where we would ensure that the insurance for that rental or for that subscription would always maximize the life cycle or the lifetime of each equipment that was produced. So if it was damaged, the insurance would provide repair. Like, we would ensure that we would maximize lifetime cycles of every produced equipment. So we could actually be involved on every rental and maximize the impact of these companies that were not doing rental before, or they were actually already on rental, but they didn't have the possibilities of doing it at such a larger scale.
Brilliant. Well, it's a real success story on how you've scaled up very successfully. Rita, tell us about Torg and how that came about.
Yeah, my name is Rita. I am the co-founder and CCO at Torg. Torg is a B2B matchmaking platform for the F&B industry. We have a database of more than 80,000 manufacturers all over Europe. It's the largest one. And then what we do is we create matches between the manufacturers and either retailers or wholesalers sourcing these products. Focus primarily on private label products. And the way that we think about circularity and the way that we think about wasting less is through creating transparent supply chains. So more and more consumers, including you, probably care about what they're eating or what they're consuming. And private label historically, private label, by the way, is a product that you buy at a supermarket that doesn't have a brand or has the brand of that supermarket. Has historically been a very cheap product or something that's just not well thought out. And this is really changing, and we want to be part of that change. So really helping our manufacturers go further into lean manufacturing, really creating a lot of transparency for the retailers who are sourcing as to where the products are coming from, how much waste is created, and then, just creating a lot of more efficiencies throughout the process. And
yeah, and you singled out the phrase lean manufacturing. Perhaps you can just elaborate on what you mean by that.
Yeah, so lean manufacturing is when manufacturers, whether that's in the food industry or any industry, really map out their manufacturing process and try to make it more efficient. So that's both in terms of wasting less and not creating overstock, but also making the process more lean, right? So helping it happen maybe faster, or making it waste less, or just focusing on the value that the customer or the end user cares about the most, and making that at the heart of the manufacturing.
Yeah, and obviously you've been able to do that through digitalization and AI. Tell us a bit about how you managed to do that, which you wouldn't have been able to do 3 or 4 years ago, right?
Yeah, so it's still a work in progress. Torg has only been around for about a year. But I mean, one of our ethos, let's say, has been helping humans focus on what humans are good at, and helping humans not do things that are just better done by a machine. So this is why we've digitized a lot of the sourcing product. We're hoping as well in the future to be able to create a lot of insights for the manufacturers to be able to integrate a lot of the data that we have into the way that they manufacture their products.
And just previously, just explain to set the scene, how would private label buyers have got hold of their food and beverage prior to, say, a company like yours coming onto the market?
Yeah, so it's a very offline process. They go to trade fairs, which are, by the way, creating a lot of waste. I mean, I was at one last week in Amsterdam. Massive spaces, lots of waste, a lot of samples being thrown around. It's a very manual process, so they're often working with companies that are not very digital, so they're going to have to visit them at the factory, or give them a call, and there's very little information that's digitized, so it makes it a lot harder to pick the right manufacturer, and it takes a long time. So we're trying to cut out the time, create more transparency, make it a lot easier, and make it a lot more accessible. Keeping in mind as well the end consumer who is getting a better product on the shelf.
Yeah, much more choice as well. I mean, presumably at these food fairs, you're talking about what percentage of food and beverage available to potential buyers compared to what Torg offers?
It's actually crazy. So only 8% of the world's food and beverage manufacturers exhibit at these trade fairs. There's many reasons for that. It's really expensive, so it costs them about $30,000, $40,000 to attend these types of trade fairs, and you can imagine smaller companies that are probably doing a lot better products cannot afford that. We're increasing choice. We're equalizing the market in a way as well, putting more manufacturers on the map, and eventually creating better products.
Yeah, I heard, I think it was your CEO who called it a sort of a Tinder-based...
It was me, I coined that term.
You? Okay. Maybe you can just...
Or the Tinder for sourcing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we have to try and make circularity sexy, right? So that's perfect. I like that idea. And actually, touching on the word circularity, Guillaume, I mean, I just wonder, is it a word that has entered the mainstream yet, or do you still struggle using it? And how do people react when you use that terminology?
Well, my view on circularity is that it's a super complex word that requires a lot of stakeholders involved. So I was listening to Hit and Torg, like they are more upstream in terms of the kind of the circularity, all the circularity layers that you can actually be involved. We are more on the downstream, and I feel that I believe it's a very important word because it can be used. It's very correlated with impact, with sustainability, and brands and retailers. Like everyone wants a bit of it, but not every retailer or brand is doing yet enough.
Why is that?
Well, I feel it's a process. It's really hard for them to really understand, like if you're doing good business-wise, like why should you change? And I feel that in what's happening is that there's obviously this new generation of consumers that's valuing access over ownership, for example, or are really worried about what they're buying, what's the impact, what's the CO2 emissions for every product that's produced, what's the tons of CO2 that's used to ship and produce something that you eat or drink. And that type of mentality is kind of, I feel brands now know it, so now it's kind of becoming an even ever more popular word. But I feel that we're still, there's a lot of stakeholders like really need to be involved, and we need to push in all directions need to be pushed, being it both in legislation, so like EU sent like passed a law for the right of repair, and that was why like IKEA and other brands started seeing like rental as an option. And I feel that this is actually happening now because retailers are also feeling, and brands, that they could have be involved with customers that actually have higher margins, so they'll spend more, have higher customer lifetime values, but they won't also do impulse buying. They'll become like repetitive, constant clients that you can actually build a relationship upon. So I feel like, yeah, it's a complex word alone, but I think that there's a lot happening in this space, and I'm very, very confident about what the future holds.
Yeah. What about you, Rita? The word circularity. What does it mean to you?
I really agree with what you said. I think also there's, just from like a linguistic problem, it's a bit of an inaccessible word sometimes, right? You hear a lot of people who work maybe in nonprofits talk about it, or people who are really committed to the cause, and it hasn't quite infiltrated, at least when I talk about food and beverage, it's a very old school industry, right? So it hasn't really resonated yet. On the retail side, it has, but on the manufacturer side, I mean, maybe if you really talk about lean manufacturing, or you talk about wasting less, or you talk about specific things that create value for the consumer, but also help them save money. So I think it's about using the right language to speak to the stakeholder you're working with. So Gen Z consumers, they all care about circularity. They know, they're very familiar with this word. Somebody in their 60s who's been producing the same kind of Parmigiano for their whole lives is not really going to relate to this word. So I think it's about finding the right word for the right audience and engaging all the different stakeholders in a way that speaks to them and that speaks to their values as well.
Yeah, maybe reframing it. I was going to ask you, Guillaume, when you approach.
Yeah, just one thing. Like I find this so curious because, like, while we feel that retailers are touching a lot on the world upon circularity, for our industry specifically, that we're doing a lot rental, subscription of equipment, etc. Think about South Summit. Like all this equipment that's here, it's rented out, right? Mm-hmm. Like South Summit is not an owner of any of this equipment. So, but the companies that are renting out the equipment to South Summit, they are not measuring impact. They are not checking CO2 savings. They do not know how many times have they extended the lifetime versus the typical lifetime cycle of any equipment that they actually own. Whilst on the other side, you see retailers and brands really pushing towards circularity and CO2 savings, where they are not really in the business of actually being as circular as they potentially could be. So I think it's really interesting for us also to help smaller SMBs that are on the space already, that are already renting out, and they have an impact that they are not aware of, that we can be also enablers of that data and information, because that will be really valuable for them in the future.
Really tap into that market and realize it's useful for the Generation Z. And I was going to just ask you, Guillaume, that when you approach a company, maybe just when you would talk about reframing and using the right vocabulary, and presumably companies who are used to have been going in a linear direction prior to this movement towards a circular economy, they still want to know that they can make revenue and at the same time that they can make an impact on the environment, because they know that's what customers want. So I guess that's where you perhaps push a little further as well.
Yeah, we try to build upon kind of a lot of data where you can see that if you typically buy and sell stuff, like if you sell it once, what's your margin? How much more can you do if you rent or do subscription on that same type of equipment? And then potentially you've maximized that utilization for 10x the amount of times and value, and then you can actually refurbish it and sell it. And how much more sustainable that is versus kind of, you sold it once, I now own it, I'm using it, like the typical drill, right, that you have at your home that you use like the 2 minutes per
quarter.
Or life, right? So yeah, we try to give both the economic advantage, the sustainability upon that. So what are the CO2 savings? What are the number of incremental product utilizations that have been driven by your activity? But also try to understand that there's a lot of like when you think about sustainability and impact, there's a lot of push also, like you as a company or as a business, you want to know like what are your levers of impact, being it on kind of the impact levers 1, 2, or 3, and like we feel that on the non-direct, not on the electricity that you're consuming, etc., but on your activity, we can actually be a very interesting enabler that will make them much more compliant to EU regulation in the future, another regulation that's kind of pushing towards sustainability.
Yeah, and you talked about the subscription model, which obviously brings in customer loyalty, which is what every business wants.
Exactly.
So that's something that perhaps businesses don't think about. We've all subscribed to Netflix. I know I have for the past 10 years, and once I'm on there and I like the product, I'm not going to go away. So if you encourage companies to create good products that last with good choice, then you create this subscription model and loyalty at the same time.
Exactly, and you are able to build that relationship that much further with a client. And remember, this is not about just me or you guys, like it's even businesses. When you think about, like, for example, the construction equipment industry, like construction companies used to own all the equipment that they had, and now they're not owning it because they understand the value of accessing over owning it. So I feel that even COVID and other factors kind of all kind of pushed hard towards an industry or consumers, both businesses and individuals, that actually value access over ownership. So as a company or as a business, the most interesting thing that you can actually build upon is that relationship and understanding that if you do that, you not only will have better margins, but also have higher customer loyalty, you'll have a customer that you can engage throughout the years, and that's really, really valuable for both brands and retail.
Sure, win-win situation, right, Rita? How many clients do you have at the moment, and is there a subscription model at Torg that you work on?
Yeah, so we have thousands of manufacturers working with us. I said this, I think, before. They don't pay a subscription, actually. They pay for the introduction to the retailer. And we have hundreds of retailers and wholesalers and brands using us. We've experimented a little bit in the subscription space, but it hasn't been the way for us. We want people to pay when they're getting the direct value, so they're more paying for an introduction to access that match, let's say. So we're not, yeah, we've experimented a little bit, but subscription hasn't been our go-to model.
Yeah, something for the future, though, maybe.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I presumably that have you got many competitors in this space? Because once they realise this is a model that's much more seamless than the traditional model you were talking about, you're going to get that loyalty anyway.
So I love talking about our competitors because oftentimes, so I mean, my founders and I all came from the e-commerce space, the food tech space, and so we came with this hunger to say, okay, my co-founder worked at Zalando. He's like, if I can order shoes in a second, why can't I do this in a B2B setting? I worked at Delivery Hero. It's like, if I can order my food in a second, why can't I do this in a B2B space? Whereas a lot of our competitors were founded by the same people who have been doing this in the same way. So I find that they haven't been as tech-enabled as we have. So for us, this is, we're a product-first company, and that's really important because that's what makes us so efficient. Yeah.
Do you think there are a lot of companies out there that probably don't realize how tech can enable their business in the way that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's down to, creating efficiency in a manufacturer's space to the inefficiencies at retailers, right? Like retailers are some of the most inefficient, depends on which one and which country, but they're often overstaffed. They have a lot of people doing the same job. They don't really know who's doing what sometimes, and I think there's a lot of room to streamline that through tech.
We touch a bit on the challenges, Guillaume, perhaps with the reframing of the word circularity, and maybe also trying to persuade companies that there is some revenue benefits, obviously, by going to the access model. But what other challenges are you facing at the moment, do you think?
Well, we had to, I guess, and maybe touching a bit on competitors, I think even go-to-market is a very important word in this sector because, or kind of execution, because we had two options, or at least we see the industry on three different waves or layers. So the first wave are the operators that are already on them. As I mentioned, like audiovisual equipment rental companies that are renting out equipment for South Summit. So that could be a potential client. Those are our clients today, most of them actually, because they are still very undigitized. The experience that they provide online for the end customer is really fragmented, is really offline, so you can really build upon what they have already built. But they already have rental transactions, they already have impact that they are not measuring, but they already have a business that's up and running, and we can provide a lot of value for those businesses. So if by the way, there's audiovisual rental companies in the room,
let's talk.
Let's talk. But on the other side, we have the second wave, which we say that's the second wave because they are not there yet. They are not operating on the rental subscription space yet, which are retailers. And retailers, they have this incentive. And when you ask, like, what's the challenge? I feel the challenge on the second wave is one on kind of really understanding the economic viability for them, because some of them think that, well, if I'm building something around sustainability or rental or subscription, will this customer stop buying from me? Like, what's the downside of actually building upon that? So you need to change a bit of a cultural mindset there. And then on the second side, there are companies that are actually joining the circularity word and business as a bit of a greenwashing positioning. Yeah, so they really want to be involved, but they are not actually pushing towards being like pushing the business, the opportunity to the end customer. They're doing it on the side and like being very silent about it, and they're not making that change happen. And I feel that's a matter of time. Like with more and more companies, with more legislation, with rental companies growing, with the market growing, with the end consumers asking to access over owning, like this is something that systemic change will happen. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of kind of building the right tools, the right products, and that's hopefully what we will be better at Flecto than any other competitor.
Well, it's scaling, isn't it? Perhaps not scaling up, but scaling out is maybe the way that you need to look about growth in the future, right?
Exactly. I think we have a very kind of lean, very, very direct opportunity in the existing equipment rental industry, but this industry is actually a very interesting opportunity for us to build an even better product, because when you think about retail, a retailer that acts in Madrid, but then also has an operation in London or in Berlin, the complexity for you need to have shipping, reverse logistics, insurance, payments, invoicing. Like the complexity that you need to act upon is really, really big. So I think also as a product, we have this mindset of being delivering the best product that you can actually build upon and enable to build circularity into your business wherever you are.
Just out of interest, you mentioned the audiovisual industry as a product that it's accessible.
Yeah.
Are there some that are more challenging for this model?
I feel that we are a bit more on the B2B space due to the fact that we can add a lot of value to the average order value, which is also bigger, and that typically on the B2B side, everything is a bit more fragmented and offline and not digital. On the B2C side, I think the size of the companies are much smaller. If you think about skiing rental companies or surfing rental companies or golfing rental like sports, I think that the challenge there is a bit more on kind of making them bigger, helping them to grow, whilst kind of audiovisual and construction equipment companies already kind of have a very big kind of audience. I think these companies are a bit more fragmented due to their size and maybe capex and other stuff.
Maybe that's something that the marketing department needs to think about more as well when you're talking about.
They love talking about that.
But just the storytelling aspect.
Yeah, I also feel that on the other side, like it's a bit more easy for us to frame kind of a narrative when you touch on kind of the individual as the end consumer. Like if you think about, like, I was owning my GoPro, and I used it like for one travel a year or a camera, and my phone that I also bought it from Apple at 1,200 euros. Like if you think about all these types of equipments, you can actually rent it out once, or you can do a subscription out of it. Whenever you have a new phone coming out, you can actually subscribe to the new one. And so kind of, I think it's a bit more sexy when you think about the individual than the business. Yeah. But there's a lot of, the growth opportunity on the business is a bit bigger, so we need to kind of be very strategic on where we focus first.
Sure. What about you, Rita? What have been and what are the current main challenges for you, and where do you see the opportunities now moving forward with regards to...
So we're also B2B, and I think it's also a little bit of educating the customer, right? So a lot of retailers think that just a simple example. So they'll say, oh, but we already know all the good pasta manufacturers. And I say, okay, how many are those? And they'll say like 20. And I'm like, okay, but actually there's 250. And so I think it's often educating the customer that the market is a lot bigger than they see, and helping them sort of see beyond the way that they're used to doing things. So for us, that's been a challenge. And if we think a little bit about circularity as well, again, it's a very traditional way. So people are really, I've been making this for 60 years, and I'm the best person who makes this. On the manufacturer side, this recipe works, and they don't realize that customers are changing, and customer values are changing, and people care more about circularity, and people care more about where their food is coming from. So even if you're a traditional manufacturer in a small village, you need to start thinking about these things. So yeah, I think there's customer education is a big one.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I've got teenage kids who are not interested in buying cars, but they're interested in mobility, and that's just one example, isn't it, of how, this generation is changing. As you say, it is about education, it is about just that businesses need to understand that the consumer now really wants access and ease and doesn't want the burden, I guess, of ownership, Guillaume.
Yeah, the cost of owning is huge, like for an individual and for a company. Like you need to maintain the equipment, like the speed of technology, where you have an equipment that is much better than it was launched the year after. Like it's crazy, like, and it's a burden of owning all that stuff as an individual. Like for me, like I'm working based out of Lisbon, but tomorrow I might be working based out of New York or Paris or whatever. Like I don't want to own anything. Like I want to be free. I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to access stuff that's actually very convenient for me wherever I am. And I feel that companies, I mentioned that example, construction companies feel the same. Like they're not owning, and the capex of owning is tremendous. Like you need to maintain the equipment, you need to ensure that it's fixed. Like think about just a subscription rental business, like Grover, for example, which is huge. Like they need to validate every equipment that comes back to their store, refurbish it, make it, ensure that it's on proper conditions to actually have that business rented out again. So that all that operation, like if you are an individual and if you're not, and if you're owning the cost, like the cost of actually making all that maintenance is huge for the companies. And I feel also that we are always talking about margins and revenue, and in the end, there's a lot of also cost efficiencies that these models bring to retailers that we really want to leverage upon too.
It's just about simplifying our lives,
yeah,
right?
just simplifying.
Basically, we all just want experiences.
Exactly.
We don't want to own a huge amount of things. We've got 1 minute left, so perhaps we can just ask you both where you see the future in the circular economy. Starting with you, Rita, how many years do you feel we've got to go till we get to an established position where it's there on the mainstream?
I mean, thinking a little bit about what you do, I would love to see how this would implement in like food and beverage manufacturing, right? So I think that's an industry that really can benefit from this, because oftentimes, especially if you're looking at like product development, sometimes you're developing a product just for 1 or 2 customers, and it doesn't make sense that you change all your process for that. But if you're, Mercadona, maybe they'll change the process for you. So I think it's more, just finding more synergies, focusing on the customer value, and really speaking the language of these people to make sure that they're seeing the value of moving towards more circularity.
Sure. Do you want to sum things up, Guillaume?
Yeah, I'll sum things up. I feel that the wave 2 and 3, like retailers and brands, will be kind of the big push towards kind of enabling circularity to all of us.
Great. Just before we go, just tell people here how they can get hold of you. Give us the website.
Yeah, so you can get a hold of me at Guilherme Guerra at LinkedIn, but the website is flecto.io, or you can connect via the app. I'm super responsive. So.
Yeah, also find me on LinkedIn, Rita Kerbaj, or Kerbach, if you speak Spanish. And we're usetorg.com. Find me after as well, I'll be around.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations, both of you, on such brilliant, innovative, progressive businesses. I wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much,
I am no doubt that you will do. So thanks very much indeed.
You.
A round of applause,
Thank you,
please, for Rita and Guillaume.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.